Thanks everybody for coming. I think we do have a few more folks coming in, hopefully in the next few minutes, and we do have lunch coming in for you guys. Thank you, Stu and Diane, for arranging that this time so you don't have to starve your way through the meeting. Again, my name is Darcy White with Clarion Associates. My colleague Kristen Sazowski, and we have been working with the city on the plan update as well as the code update. And so this is our second meeting of the General Plan Advisory Committee, and as you recall, last time we spent a lot of time talking about kind of what's in the plan now, the 2002 plan. We looked at different sections in detail and got feedback from you all, as well as the rest of the community. And what we have in front of you today are probably about 2/3 of the sections. We're still working through a couple of those. The land use, growth management sections, and the economic development sections are yet to come. But we wanted to get you in this initial, it's a lot of material to go through. So we thought we would start there, and then we'll come back to you with the remaining sections and work through those as well. So what I'd like to do, I know, some of you have probably read through a lot of it. Some of you are still kind of working your way through. But I think what I'd like to do is just go through section by section and kind of hit the highlights of anything that jumps out at you that you think we've missed, any other ideas that you have, and we'll kind of go from there. I think in general, what we heard from the meetings last time, as well as through the online survey we had, which was basically the same information we covered with this group, as well as with the public meetings. We had that available for about a month after our meetings, and we had about 25 or 30 folks weigh in that way with some additional suggestions, so that was helpful. And we're going to do the same thing this time. As we have new material available, it'll be up there. So we'll keep doing that just to get as much feedback as we can. But I think overall, the feedback we got was that, fundamentally the plan isn't broken, but I think there are a lot of opportunities for refinement is what we heard. And so I think that's kind of where we are in terms of we've taken a first pass at trying to fold those ideas in, and just want to hear from you at this point and continue to refine it as we go here. So with that, I'm happy to start in two different ways. Either we can, if someone's got burning issues they want to get on the table right away, on the first section, we'll start there, which is kind of the introductory section, kind of gives you the framework of the plan, or we can kind of do round robin like we did last time, but we've got a smaller group, so I think we can keep this pretty informal. So, anybody want to start on the first section here? Anything that you want to? Yeah, I think getting into the introductory section, which gives you some background on the general plan, the statutes, and the overall structure. This is pretty basic stuff. So, anything earth-shattering that's missing here, or ideas for this section? Okay, we'll get into the meaty stuff then. So the first kind of substantive piece that we'll talk about then is the vision statement. And we talked a little bit about this last time with you guys, and I think this was one of those areas where thought there were some refinements to make, and I guess what we're looking for is it making better sense to you now? We've tried to make it more, some of the feedback we got was try to make it more of a forward statement instead of, kind of a passive statement. And so it's been reworked a little bit to try to address that, but would like to get your thoughts on how that feels now, if there are other refinements that you'd like to see. And that's on page 11 of the packet that we put in your seat there. You like it?
Without compromising community's values, I think it's significant.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry.
I see the revisions in it. I do appreciate the last line where it says services without compromising community values. I think that sums it up myself. But
other thoughts on vision, Dean?
No, I think that what you've come up with is fine.
Thanks. Especially being the recreation aquatic manager, I really particularly support the verbiage regarding the recreation and cultural activities and the outdoor lifestyles. We know that a lot of people come here for the recreational opportunities that the city and community have to offer, and I'm glad that it's in the vision statement as well.
I will probably reread it again and just make sure. But I think just going through it, it looks pretty good.
Yeah, I think it incorporates everything we talked about the last meeting. I'm comfortable with it.
Great, great. And keep in mind, those in the audience, what we've talked about is this is really building on the work the community's done in the past. There was a tremendous amount of involvement in the 2002 process, and this is really kind of just trying to refine it and take it to the next level for this iteration. So, all right, well, let's keep moving on then. So our next section is housing and neighborhoods, and this incorporates both the housing element as well as the neighborhood preservation and revitalization element. So there was some mention of this in the previous plan, but this is an area, one of those areas where we kind of expanded it and have tried to provide some more guidance in this section. So Nellie, you want to start since we got the mic there?
I read through this. I don't have any issues with it. I'll yield to the expert next to me, though.
Okay. One part that I did that jumped out at me was, let's see what page it is. 33. Where it talks about the mixed use.
I'm sorry, the version that was sent to you, the email to you. The page numbers are going to be a little bit different. So if you can, tell us where you are on the packet copy, that would be great. Starts on page 38, that section.
It would be page 39 in the very first paragraph.
Okay.
They talk about the mixed use and how we should have it down by the lakefront and the city's downtown. And I know some of the districts that were created changed everything to mixed use, but that wasn't what was in the initial 2002 general plan. It's changes that were made. Me personally, and I think a lot of people in the community, we wanted commercial down at the lakefront because that is where your tourists are going to go. That's where they're going to be. So the more commercial you have, to me, that's the better economic development you have for our community. Plus, if you get too much residential component down there, they now have a huge voice in what happens on the lakefront in the channel. So I'm not so sure. I mean, if we're going to go forward with what the council changed our general plan to, then yeah, that works. If we're going to stick with what the people wanted from 2002 and with all the surveys that were done prior to all these changes being made, none of them wanted residential uses down there. So that's still a sticking point for me. And I'll get into some of the other stuff later, but I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on that.
Or are you more concerned with condo-type residential uses or hotel, motel, or timeshare? How would you define that?
Yeah, it's the condo-type uses where you have the ownership. Motels, hotels, that type of stuff, more hotels I picture, whether they're tall, you know, more in height is not the issue. It's having ownership where those people now have a voice. And plus it doesn't draw the visitors down to that area if you're going to have a majority of condos.
Yeah, I'd like to speak briefly about in particular the circulation access and access to open space. One of the things that's happening right now is that the city has an RFQ out now for a field assessment study. And I think part of that is that we're going to be looking at school property as well, in order to look at city and school property to best utilize and figure out how to and best use all the public property that we have for recreational needs. I can't help but think that when that study comes back, that we'll see that the school district is going to play a really big part in providing facility space, recreational space, to the community. I would have to say that with that and with the development of trails to access those school areas and adjacent to our parks, I think that the concepts here are great, but I think we certainly have a long ways to go to get that done. But certainly all those three components would need to come together in order to become really functional for people of our community.
So just to kind of try to encapsulate that a little bit. So you're talking about a couple things: coordination with other agencies, including the school district, to come up and basically to try to maximize available resources. Is that kind of fair to say?
Yeah, that's good. I think the plans, plan, including this, especially with the trails plan, has that in there. I think that really what we have to do is as a city, we have to look at outside funding, whether it's fundraising efforts or whether it's striving harder to obtain trail grants through the federal and state process. But again, I think all the ideas are great and they're here. But again, we kind of have a long ways to go to make that connectivity happen, which again benefits the neighborhoods, which this section is all about.
So focus on action and kind of what those steps might look like. Okay, great. Dean, any comments on the housing?
No.
I share the concern I think Ms. Smith does about the condo development. I really don't have any problem at all with the hotel, motel, and even the timeshare use, which is really a modified hotel use. But I know that the community is very concerned about too much condo development at the lake areas. I would hope we could find a way to limit or maybe even change the percentage densities that we have in the allowance, or limit somehow the height allowances for those, because I think what the community approved then, and as it gets kind of morphed into the future, we have to be very cautious with that. I also recognize that many times it takes a residential ownership component in order to finance these projects, and we may have to do something, but I would agree that ownership of a huge majority of land ownership entities too close to that would be a lopsided effort, and I'd be afraid of that.
This seems to be a topic that's come up a couple of times now, both in this forum as well as other discussions. Maybe this would be an opportunity for us to use like an online survey type thing to determine, because it seems like one of the as minor or major departures from the original 2002 plan, as there probably is, the dichotomy, if you will, between the mixed use versus the commercial use, and that in that specific location in and around the channel, the island, that kind of thing. Lakefront, okay. So maybe we could take the opportunity to put together a little survey or something and put it on the webpage as part of the overall.
I think that's a great idea, Stu. And what I would suggest, this, it comes up in the housing section, but it's a key part of both the land use chapter as well as the development code. And so we're working through sort of some of those nuances, and that's something we'll bring back to you in December, is sort of the specifics of those mixes that you're talking about, Jim, in terms of, okay, what, we say that, but what does it mean in terms of a particular category and where? And that's where we can maybe have a deeper conversation about some of the specifics. Does that sound fair? And then follow up with an online questionnaire?
That's why we have the designation of resort mainland and
Right.
resort island to
Exactly.
help separate those. So,
Exactly.
Sure.
So it may be the devil's certainly in the details here, and that's something we can talk more about.
The way the question is formulated is very, very important. The surveys that were done by the city, and I had them with me last time, I didn't bring them this time, instead of saying, here's the uses, which ones would you prefer, or which ones do you want, which ones do you not want, they changed it to say important and not important. And if you wanted a use, it was important. If you didn't want the use, it was not important. So then years later, when you bring up the results, condominiums became not important off the charts. But it didn't mean people didn't care if they had condos. It meant we don't want this. So, and that doesn't a lot of times get explained. So when you ask the question, is it going to be what type of uses would you prefer to see, or how are you going to structure that question?
And I think my suggestion on that is maybe what we can do is when we meet with this group again next time, we'll have the land use chapter to talk through some of those details, but also we can put together some preliminary questions to kind of help get some response to that, and you guys can kind of take a look and see if we've got it framed in a way that makes sense to you before we post those. Okay.
I think from the code side of things, as we work through your permitted uses, I mean, there's been a shift from, it was initially the Bridgewater Channel Overlay District, and then there was that transition to the Channel Riverwalk District. So, and those both still exist in your code. So part of what we're doing is looking at the uses that are allowed in each and combining them. And so I definitely also foresee a lot more communication on both of these project components.
Anything else on housing and neighborhoods?
On neighborhood identities, it says encourage the development of planned neighborhoods with a distinct identity in terms of their mix of housing types and other things. How do we do that? How does the general plan encourage an identity within a neighborhood? And I guess the context of the question is, we in a town that's already 85% or more infilled already, how do we do that? What is the intent of that?
That was a concept that was in the 2002 plan. We heard you guys loud and clear. I think last time we talked about the concept of complete communities, and you said no, that's not a direction we want to go. We're one neighborhood. There are a lot of different opportunities within that neighborhood as a complete a city as a whole. And so I think the original intent of this policy, as I understand it, is really if there is an opportunity in the future for planned development, whether it's on the island or on the fringe, or if a new large parcel becomes available and there's a single plan for a new community, a new neighborhood, that it's going to have its own kind of look and feel. It's probably going to be different than the original kind of platted area of the city. So that's kind of what that gets at. Does that make sense, or do you think that's something that?
I was hoping that's what it was. I wasn't sure how we're going to do that within existing.
Yeah, definitely doesn't. Yeah, and we can make that more clear, Jim. I think that's a good clarification. So this goal and the policies that go with it is a lot of it has to do with kind of when those new opportunities do come along, which we all know they're going to be fairly limited. That you've got some tools in place to guide them. So, other thoughts on housing and neighborhoods? Okay. So that takes us into our next section is circulation, and as I mentioned to the group this morning, we've kind of framed up in here that this is a lot of this section really is going to be ultimately driven by the MPO plan that's happening. They're going to be doing their kickoff meeting for their committee in December, and so that will be happening on a parallel track. There's going to be a lot of great information that comes out of that that's going to be more detailed than what we're able to do. And so while we've kind of carried forward what we've heard, tried to capture those things to help their process, we'll be working with them to modify the policies and the goals in this section if needed based on what comes out of that process. So that's kind of where we are on this section. But this will include both the original transportation element that the 2002 plan, but also a new bike element, and so that's something that will also be kind of expanded for this purpose. Any comments or questions on kind of where that section stands now that we can help use to give Jean and her group at the MPO any guidance as they get into their process? Okay. Okay.
Is there going to be any iteration with that group in this group?
Yeah, we'll be working with them when they get a little bit further along, and ultimately what we would envision is as they've got kind of more substance kind of developed, we'll circle back. We'll probably have a full draft. We will have a full draft of the plan at that point, but we'll have to come back at some point and sort of update this section before it gets ratified.
And Jean was present this morning to give some feedback.
Yeah, so we've already been coordinating with the MPO as we go along here. So, and we can circle back to any of these sections as we go along. So I don't want to rush you here. Anything else on circulation bikeway. Okay. So that takes us to our next section, which is open space and recreation. And again, this is kind of building on what was in the plan earlier. We've got the open space element as well as the recreation element. There were 2 plans done, the trails plan, and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, 2006, and then the facilities plan was done in 2008, I believe. So there was some more recent information we could draw from in terms of needs and community vision even from that work. But I think we're looking for any suggested refinements in terms of the policies and goals that we have in this document. Anything from you, Dan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, I think that the verbiage is pretty comprehensive about what the ideas are. I think that it's really important that we include the school district in these discussions, because we have to really, in order to use our public lands as efficiently as possible, we have to realize what the open space opportunities that the school district has already provided for us. Well, the question is, how do we maintain those in a way that they are usable and they are safe? And I think that that we need to look at that harder. I think too that I previously mentioned the fields need assessment. I think that when that study gets done, then that's going to lend a lot of value to any further planning that we do, because it does include school lands as well as all current park space. It'll identify existing fields, how we can best maintain those and utilize those as efficiently as possible, as well as determine how many fields ball fields that we would need in the future, and then also the development construction of new fields, and when and where and how those will be taken care of.
Laura, Nello, Dean. Okay, Dean's got. Let's go that way first. Okay.
When you talk about school district facilities or lands or whatever, what are you talking about? Existing fields, existing facilities?
That's correct. I think that when we look at existing space for recreation needs, that we can't overlook what the school district already has provided, and they're so close to nearly all the neighborhoods that we have. I mean, within walking distance, certainly within biking distance, and I think the school district. When I look at fields that can be used, I see that maybe we could maintain those better. There are concerns about the safety of some of those fields, and when we look at our overall inventory, we have to decide whether or not to, that we can even use those. So I guess that right now we're talking about primarily the city property, when in fact we should include those too in our overall assessment and inventory. So I don't know if I've answered your question or not, but.
I said we're already doing that to some extent in our exchange of use of the school district facilities in exchange for water. So are you thinking of expanding that kind of thing or something entirely different? Because there are some specific rules and regulations about how the city can how the city could support the school district and contribute in various ways.
I was at a meeting of the field users about a month and a half ago, and the soccer people, who have nearly 800 constituents, certainly have a powerful voice, and they kept going on and on about the lack of facilities. And the facilities that we did have, particularly school district property, that need to be maintained in such a manner that they are usable and that they are safe. So I think that yes, we have those agreements between the city and the school district, and they work great. The after-school program is a model, that can best use to support the cooperative effort that we have now. But I think that when we get it to third-party user groups, baseball, soccer, softball, and when we look at those facilities that are outdoor facilities primarily, that the school district needs some help with maintenance. So there was talk about that possibly how can we get the user groups to work cooperatively with the school district to possibly provide maintenance services on public lands in order to enhance those facilities and make them more usable, because there are some right now that are frankly, just they just need some work.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the intergovernmental agreement right now between the city and the schools, city provides water, sewer, maintenance of the fields. Does it not? I mean, my understanding is that we do provide some of the maintenance too, for now, not capital improvements of the field, not going in and like redoing the entire field, but we do provide some of that. I have that on my email, but I don't know if I can get into it. And in exchange, then both the school district can utilize the city facilities as long as the city isn't using them, and city can utilize the school district facilities. My understanding is the city must provide, or the school district must give the city, here's the dates we're using this, because it's through the Parks Department that, like your Little League and that, actually get the fields, and I think they're charged a fee, some of the groups. So to a degree we are doing that. And if I could pull up the IGA changed, and I don't know if I have the new one anyway, that just changed recently. So.
Stu, is that something you can clarify?
I don't know if I can clarify it at this point in particular, because I haven't read the IGA or anything. I know it's changed recently, but I don't believe maintenance. I think it's a water for recreational use kind of existing facilities, but I'm going off of memory, of course. But that's something we can obtain and have you look at and be part of the discussion.
Okay, we'll take a look at that IGA and just try to get some more information.
But isn't the purpose of this to encourage the agreement of that and the dealing of that in the future?
Yes.
Yeah. I know that on an annual or biannual basis, that is a hard negotiated deal that goes both ways. It's a terrific agreement. I just wish they'd have even more to share, but who knows? I had a question on the minimum park area standard. Oh, I'm sorry.
Really wasn't relative to what the conversation was going on, but relative to parks. And this may be more germane to the economic or growth development element of the general plan. But don't want to lose sight when we're talking about ball fields and those types of things, that one of the big opportunities we have to drive visitors to Lake Havasu are regional tournaments and those types of things. And one of the biggest complaints that I've heard from people who are involved in these events is the lack of a central location or a big enough facility. Trying to transport hundreds of children and parents throughout a city that they're not familiar with. I won't get into the issue of wayfinding, but the fact that we don't have a central location for these parks, I just don't want to lose sight of that. Again, this might be more germane to the economic development and growth segment of the plan, but I just want, while we're talking about the parks.
Great. No, I think it sounds like it might be something that goes in both sections, so. Anything else on parks and recreation? Hey, Jim?
On page 56, the minimum park area standard, it calls to provide a minimum standard of 10 acres of parkland per 1,000. which translates in a town of 55,000 to about almost 1 square mile of park area, and which I think is wonderful, by the way. But one of the things that I've been very curious about lately is I know that Havasu has the benefit of having a lot of really great park space compared to other cities of our size. Like we have more RV garage space than anybody else out there in the world. But I wonder, with our population, our demographics, and how we're shifting, how are we comparing in these park spaces compared to other cities of similar size? And how do we quantify that as a good or bad thing? Because I happen to be one of the things we need even more, even though I think we have more than normal.
I'd like to know where it stands today. You know, that's the 10-to-1 rule.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's only 1,000 rule.
Oh.
We're getting the.
You know, I agree 100%. What I'd like to know is where we are today in Lake Havasu. I think this is probably some general rule of thumb that was established probably back in 2000, 2002. But I'd like to know where we are today. And my guess is it's probably the ratio is a lot different than what it's saying here. So understanding that, and then understanding how we do compare to communities of similar size would be, I think, an important consideration as we move forward and try to develop our own rule of thumb or status here.
The 2008 facilities plan looked at that issue, and Dan, I can't remember off the top of my head what that. Do you recall what the ratio is now citywide?
No, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay, but yeah, that's something we can build into the narrative and try to address. But I think there was some work done on that in terms of the 2008, more detailed. Kind of park definitions and different things that we've included here, because the national standards do vary by park type, and as you've said, Jim, it's gonna Stu's got a point here.
I might be able to add a little clarification on that based on my historical participation here, or hysterical, depending on what you want to call it. But that figure was pulled in the 2002 plan, was pulled from existing park information that came from our Parks Master Plan at that time. So it may have been even developed or determined before 2002. But I can tell you that that number has since changed, because in the meantime we've annexed Sarah Park, which is going to make a huge difference just acreage-wise, and as far as developed parks. I might go on just to suggest that we have a lot of land, city-owned land, that's dedicated for park use or potential park use that is yet undeveloped. Correct. A lot of what I would consider neighborhood parks, because they're somewhere between 5 and 12 acres, and they're randomly, sporadically distributed throughout the community, designated by the Parks Master Plan as something that could be utilized for a park in the future, but yet to be developed because of financial considerations.
And just to give you, so that the total acres of parks today, and I'm not going to try to do math in my head, Jim, I'm really bad at it, but it's 1,214, including the Sarah Park addition. So, but Sarah Park, if Stu, correct me if I'm wrong, it's about 1,000 acres. So the bulk of that is Sarah Park, a large part of it which is undeveloped. But in terms of total land area, that's what you're looking at. So that's where the sort of distinctions between types of facilities,
right,
what services they provide, and those types of kind of striations start to make a difference in what your needs are.
That's an important distinction, because at that number we're already at twice the park than the standard
Right.
asks for, and that Sarah Park is the strange one, because it's so open and undeveloped. But I was just curious where that came
Yep.
from.
Other comments on parks and open space? Nella.
Just a clarification. I'm asking for a clarification. You have open space classifications here, and it's 2,831 acres has been designated for parks/open space in the land use plan on my page 59.
Mm-hmm.
What is that relative to the 1,214 that you just mentioned?
So there's a couple different categories on the future land use plan. One of them is actual designated park space, and then there's another open space designation, which includes not just what's existing, but also proposed long-term strategy. And so that's why there's a distinction in that number. And, you know, so the 1,200 represents what's existing today. Yeah. No, that's a really good point, Nello. Other comments on parks and open space? Okay. You guys want to take a 5-minute break and grab some lunch since it's here?
Come by land or come by boat. Either way, when you're in Lake Havasu City, you have to see London Bridge Beach. With green grass, tall shade trees, covered picnic areas, unique lighthouses, and wide open spaces make this park the ideal spot for enjoying the outdoors. Tree-lined walking paths lead to the famous London Bridge, while the volleyball, basketball, playgrounds, and safe swim area will keep the entire family entertained. There's even concessions and watercraft rentals available seasonally. Bring your furry friends and let them run free inside the Lions Dog Park. Reserve a picnic area for a private event, or simply kick back, relax, and enjoy the view. You'll find it all here at London Bridge Beach. Lake Havasu City, Arizona, play like you mean it at golakehavasu.com.
All right, we are back in action. Take your time if you're still munching, but want to get everybody out of here on time since I know you're all busy. So just to close the loop on the Parks and Recreation, I think I had one follow-up question for Dan. There was some discussion while we were munching about the facilities study, and I was just curious about timing on that. I know you mentioned there's an RFQ out now. Just curious how long it will take and kind of how that relates to our process here.
Is that all?
All right.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry about that. My understanding of the timeline is, and it is out for public notice right now for a month, and that has been out for about a couple weeks. But the anticipation is that City Council will take a look at that and hopefully approve that at their second meeting in December. I would imagine that in January we get that consultant on board and start moving that thing forward. But exactly how long that's going to take, I don't know. I would like to see that would be completed hopefully by in a decent time in association with a budget development process, depending on what the outcome is.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying. Any other last comments, questions on the Parks and Recreation section? Okay, so we have actually 2 more sections to go. Public Facilities and Services is our next one, and this deals with police and fire, public buildings, and also the cost of development element. And this is one where we will be, Stu's going to help us get with the finance folks in the next couple weeks on the cost of development piece. There's some questions about, you know, what kind of level of detail needs to be in there, et cetera. But I think at this point it'd be helpful to get some general reactions to the goals and policies in this section and kind of what your thoughts are on that. So anybody want to start here? Hello's about to. Okay.
Just some editorial changes. The citizens utility companies, citizens communications, those companies are defined differently these days. Citizens communications actually is Frontier Communications. There are multiple providers in the city, but they're the incumbent local exchange carrier. Citizens utilities, I don't want to speak for Unisource Electric or that entity, but Citizens Utilities is not their moniker anymore. So that clarification needs to be made. And when we're ready to talk about public utilities, I can offer some commentary.
Go ahead.
In some of the elements here, you know, it's pretty vague by design. I'm sure we're just starting out here. Develop a telecommunications master plan and work with communication providers to implement upgrades in telecommunications capabilities. And I think that's a valid statement and needs to be in there, but I think some more meat needs to go into it. So some definition of what those objectives are. Obviously, a lot has transpired since 2002, since 2008 on the telecommunications side relative to internet access and how communications is even utilized these days and the opportunities for public access. So I think that needs to be discussed a little bit more in detail, and we need to provide, I think in the plan it would be appropriate to have some level, at least a high level of recommendations, objectives that we want to try and get accomplished in the city over the next 10 years.
Okay. And Nello, just to follow up on that, do you have any, from your perspective, kind of thoughts on, you know, what are the, you know what's transpired, kind of what the missing components are? I mean, where do you see the greatest need with respect to that particular issue?
Well, the greatest need is relative. You know, one person's idea of a need is another person's idea of just overbuild. One of the opportunities I think that we do have to provide some kind of a municipal wireless capability, obviously with the advent of smartphones and those types of devices, having citywide access for our visitors, the utilization of that type of access to enhance the wayfinding effort, you know, through an app on your phone, through you know, everything from GPS devices, just being able to automatically hear what's going on. So you're passing the London Bridge, you hear the history of the London Bridge. I mean, there's a lot of neat things you can do relative to the technology that's available today. But to be able to utilize technology, you have to have the infrastructure built around that. So again, there's a lot of opportunity there, a lot of cost involved as well. So I mean, it's a planning and, you know, probably a phased-in approach type thing, but something to consider.
Great.
In the plan.
I guess, well, the emergency response time, have those been verified with police, fire to make sure?
That's something we're working on verifying as well, because, yeah, we recognize there have been some changes there, so.
Okay, and I know you mentioned the water supplies, water delivery, impacts on water. Is that going to go into more in depth as we get further in? Is there a whole other section on that? Or
growth management section deals more with the water issues in terms of the water boundary and that type of thing. So there's,
and that's where we have the balance of uses and how that will impact.
Right. So that deals with the limits and what the capabilities are. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot to say about this. I can say that I was glad to see that the You know, again, the planning has a lot of language that is great about, you know, what we need to do. But the question is how do we get to the end result, which is actually taking action? And one of the things I saw that was a great idea that I've seen work in other communities is the development of impact fees. Now those were in communities where there was rapid growth at that time, and so it's a little easier to justify. But I also understand that this area has been subject to some lean times recently, and it may not be as supported here. But I can tell you in other communities I've been where impact fees were put in place, it certainly helped Parks and Rec. It helped with the sewer development and building of fire stations, and it was a good idea and it worked well. So again, I look at the action items.
I'm curious, and I don't know if this is a question for staff probably, is there any, and maybe council rep here, Mr. Barlow, any CIP projects that we need to be aware of that we're looking at for in the future? Is there projects for building new parks? Is there projects for, like Main Street just came out in the paper where they're talking about that new district. Is there anything the city's looking at as assisting in funding? Which that'll be very controversial, I think, if they do. But just in the future, what kind of CIP projects, I guess, is the council looking at? Did you guys have your retreat? Was any of that brought up, I guess?
The council retreat is coming up in January. What's the date on that, Stu? Do you remember? I don't know, January 8th and 9th. Anyway, we'll be talking about those things. A couple of things that come to mind. We've talked about expansion of facilities at Sarah Park, but the limiting factor there is water. If you want to have grass, you got to have water, and we don't have that capacity right now. So, and it's going to take quite a bit of money to put that line in and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of ideas floating around, but unfortunately they're not accompanied by a lot of money. So, but we will look at all that stuff in January.
Ms. Smith took the ones I was going to actually comment on too. I was wondering where the numbers for the police response time came from, or how we compare now to these numbers, and the same thing with water, right? You know, the cow's already out of the barn on a lot of these things, but on future development, future growth, development, water standards can be limited and things like that. Mr. Keys, welcome to Havasu and welcome to impact fees. You've probably heard about them around here. They're controversial. I happen to be in the development business, in land development business, and I recognize the need for improvement fees and so forth, and development agreements between the developer and the city. I happen to support impact fees for the outside the urban containment area, which is a new building project that would impact our existing infrastructure. But I think you'll find it's going to be very difficult to convince the community to pay for people that are already here to add on to something that they already have. We've been down that, and I think we're going to have to address that again, because the growth is going to happen and we need to accommodate that in our infrastructure. But I don't know how easy impact fees will be.
And just to clarify, for those who don't have the document in front of them, basically the plan outlines a series of financing options, some tools to consider, and so there's no recommendation of one versus the other, but it's sort of a menu of options at this point, based on what we've heard. So other thoughts on public facilities and services? Okay. So the last element that we'll talk about today is community safety, and this is the new safety element. And you know, although intuitively you would think this was police and fire, it's really about hazard mitigation and resiliency and those types of things, which the city has been working with others in the region over the last few years to do a lot of work on this. So so there's stuff to build on here. I think the ideas are already kind of being executed, as I understand it, in the community. So this is really trying to capture what's happening and how to move that forward, how to work with others in the region. But would welcome any comments or feedback on this section.
I know there's a plan in place already for telecommunications. Just an observation that there already are plans, and they're updated on a regular basis for disaster preparedness relative to telecommunications. So we're required to do that.
Okay, doesn't the city have another document, or they're working on one for emergency type things? Because I know it was in where they redid like the aquatic center in case the electric goes out for hours on end. So is there some... Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
so
so there is one that's in...
We referenced two things. There's the city's emergency preparedness guide, which is online. That's kind of updated fairly regularly, and that's really more, as I understand it, about kind of personal preparedness for your family, et cetera.
Right.
And then there's also the multi-jurisdictional plan with the county and others in the region that deals with kind of bigger picture issues.
Okay, and so that kind of flows into this. Are we up? I mean, I haven't read it, so I have no clue when you... I know, that surprises you. The last time it was updated...
The multi-jurisdictional plan was from 2010, and those are required to be updated, I believe, every 5 years, I think.
Okay, so it's coming close then.
Something like that. But that's a, as I understand it, that's a, Stu, do you have something on? Oh, so the brand new one just got approved. All right.
See, I missed that.
All right. So.
Okay, so there is something that kind of already correlates into this anyway. Okay, thank you.
Anything else on this section? All right. So I think any questions or comments from our audience before we wrap up the meeting? Anyone? Mr. Mayor?
Question about conserving the water.
Please, hold on. Let's get you a microphone.
Slacking at my job.
Come on, Stu.
I brought it up before about conserving the water we have, because we have a lot of runoff that runs along a channel. And I was hoping we could create some type of a reservoir where we could not really divert the water, but rechannel the water to this reservoir and therein save all that many square feet of usable water. And I had brought it up a few times with the head of the water department and so forth. We have a lot of flood control channels in our community. If we could find a means or a way whereby we can bring the water that's runoff through those flood channels to a common reservoir, this would give us more water to use for whether it be Sarah Park or wherever the other areas are. It's only a suggestion, and again, I haven't been able to analyze the costs or the wherewithal, the geographical aspects that might be involved. And also, we should be able to reuse a lot of the pool water. We have the people empty their pools onto the streets. We have vehicles that can transport water when we're not fixing the streets. We could actually transport that pool water to this common reservoir. Think of it, the number of pools we have in Havasu. And that seems to be a primary resource. If we're going to plan for the future and develop in the future, we should utilize whatever opportunities we have. It's only a suggestion.
Thank you. All right. Any other comments or questions about what we've looked at today or kind of what's coming next?
I'm really looking forward to Chapter 11. I think that's the meat and potatoes
Yep.
one, right? Maybe a longer meeting.
Sure. We can absolutely do that. And I guess just as sort of to plant the seed for that discussion, and what Jim's referring to is the action plan, which kind of takes each of these sections and says, based on these policies, what do we need to do to move this forward? We've talked about some specific recommendations that you guys had today, ideas. Are there other ideas that you would put on the table now, that we should be thinking about as we build that section that you want to see come forward based on these policies or kind of what you're expecting? Are there recommended actions you think we should be considering to bring forward as part of the draft plan that you want to talk about now?
I'll start. Currently, to make to make a modification of the general plan for a purpose of doing a development, you have to wait for one single opportunity per year to do that. I'm sorry, that changed?
That was my big gripe.
Oh, wonderful.
Everything's a minor amendment.
Well, then what's a major amendment?
Well,
Okay.
they have a definition for it, but nothing in our city really applies.
Ah,
When did this change?
There are
yeah, I must have missed that meeting. But I'm glad that happened. It doesn't surprise me. When did that change, Stuart? And how does that affect it?
I think what you're referring to is that when we made a modification to the general plan, I believe it was in 2008 or around that, we changed some of the definitions with regard to major amendment versus minor amendment. The requirement is a state requirement that says if you're going to have a major amendment to your plan, you can only do it once a year. It has to be within the certain parameters, and what we're supposed to do is collect all those major amendments and review them and analyze them and adopt them, assumably or potentially, at the same time, so we can look at the whole.
And almost everything became
A minor amendment. When the definition, right, and when the definition changed, it allowed more things to be considered minor amendments. But we can look at that again to see how it compares to the state legislation, and the state legislation may have changed with regard to minor amendments, major amendments. I don't know if it has or not, but still the same.
In the last module 1, procedures and administration. Oh. Microphone now. The state statute is still the same in terms of you need to have 2 public hearings for any proposed change. But then, like you said, Stu, you have to collect, after those public hearings, any proposed change, they all need to be adopted at one hearing. And so we have carried forward your existing timelines in the code on when that's being done. And your existing code didn't define major and minor amendments, so we also pulled your definitions, the existing definitions from the general plan, the 2002 general plan, into the code. But the modified definitions.
It's basically, if I recall, for it to qualify as a major amendment, 40 acres. Guy had something to do with 5 acres.
Yeah, so it's any change of 5 acres or more.
Yeah, but the 5 acres, I mean, how many properties? And I think when this whole issue came up, it's like there were 3 maybe that might have qualified into that would have been a major amendment, other than your 40. But the 40 require a specific plan anyway, so it's almost like that. The definition they used for that was immaterial too. So basically, the major amendment definition we have now, nothing really qualifies, so you're not going to have. Everything will be thrown under minor. And that bothered me, because if it's a voter-approved document that this is what we want to see our city in the future, but oh, by the way, next council that comes in, simple majority can change it all. So why even go to the public? Why go through this entire thing that we're going through if it's a simple majority of council can change it at any point in time in the year? Yeah, I still have big issues with that. I'm sure you like it, because I think we went from one extreme to the other to make them jump through hoops, pay $4,000 or it's $4,500 now once a year for a major amendment was hindering development. But to go to the complete other extreme of do it anytime you want, simple majority, we need to find a median there somewhere.
So I'd like to clarify kind of, Jim, from your perspective, Jim, is that what you understood the process to be? And then obviously, I think the key thing for us going forward is it needs to be clearly defined in both the plan and the code. We need to bring those definitions back to this group and have those conversations, but there's also the state law component that we need to be respectful of, and so we will do that, but I want to understand a little bit more kind of, is it the acreage size? As we talked earlier, I think that it was the timing that was a bigger concern for you, and I think Chris and I were looking at the statutes earlier. We're a little unclear as to how much flexibility there is with that, but that's something we'll explore further, so.
Thank you. I appreciate knowing the difference. I did not realize that we've worked around that rule by changing everything to basically a minor amendment, and that I actually have a problem with, and I don't agree with that as a good solution. My issue is with the major amendment having only one opportunity. I think there should be a difference between a major and a minor.
Right, but we can't.
And the state law thing, is that a maximum of one time per year, or is that just a stated? Yeah, so that's a state problem.
Yeah, and I was just going to take that one step further and suggest that the state mandates the one time per year, the major amendments. And what was happening is, because of the way we had the definitions in the past, everything was turning out to be a major amendment. And so we were continually telling these individuals, hey, you can submit, we're going to hold it for 7 months and wait until whatever the designated time frame was. We're going to look at these all together and then make a major amendment to the plan if adopted. We went the other direction, as you pointed out. However, there's still a process in place. I mean, it's still reviewed by the Planning Commission, I believe, 2 public hearings. It also goes to the City Council. So whether it's a major or minor amendment, it's still reviewed by citizen public participation. And I'm just defending the system.
Well, and I think just to provide some perspective in terms of how these types of plans typically work. I mean, I think there's always the assumption that the plan needs to have some flexibility in it. The question is always how much flexibility and how do you define it and what's the process to do that? And the goal is always to make it as clear as possible so that there is opportunity for input. But I think when you're doing a long-range plan for 10 to 20 years, there are a lot of things you can't anticipate. And I think that's the crux of trying to balance, what's really truly an opportunity and what's kind of being true to the plan. And so that's something that, really does come down to the council to try and balance in terms of what those future questions are. So.
And it's tricky because the statute defines a major amendment very loosely, but it doesn't define a minor amendment. And one thing that I think we still need to talk through too is a major amendment within the statute seems to be also address a readoption. And so when we're dealing with the general plan right now, this a readoption of the plan. So the definitions do need to be looked at a little bit more closely, and something that we would like to discuss with your city attorney too.
If it's on it's a different topic.
I guess legally, can you in a minor amendment, if it were a minor, I know state statutes, like you said, isn't real clear. So could we have something in there where, like, if it jumps 2 densities, then it takes more of a simple majority? You need to have 6 out of the 7 council approve it. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to, where it's a real controversial thing and something that the citizens really wanted and fought for in the general plan, I want it to be a little more difficult to change. And that's the issue with that I have right now with the definition, because it's basically, granted you have your process, but there's, from my perspective and my feeling, there's a majority of council that doesn't realize you're supposed to follow what's in the general plan. It's not based on opinion, and when you get to the zoning code, it's definitely, there are areas that are opinion, but if it isn't in the code, you have to deny it, whether you think it's in the best interest of the community or not. If the code says you can't do it, it's prohibited, sorry, go work on changing the code. But don't approve something that the code prohibits. And we just had something on that 2 weeks ago. And I almost made it to the meeting to make my comments, but I got there a little late and they'd already voted. But I don't know how you make that clear to the council, but that is when you talk about process, well, we still go through a process, commission hears, a council hears. Well, if they don't realize you have these codes in place that they're supposed to follow and it's not based on your opinion, then all of it's really, why are we doing any of it if it's all looked at as an opinion? And I'm sorry, I get off on it, because this part really bothers me, I guess, so as you can tell.
No, I think it underscores, I mean, this is an important issue for a lot of reasons, and I think, like I said, I think the best we can do is to try to clarify this, make it as clear as we can in both the code and the plan, and that as we're going along in this process and presenting the final document, I think as part of the implementation plan, that's something that needs to be hammered as well, is that this is the process that's been defined for legal reasons as well as just kind of regular process reasons. So we can try to help that way. I think once it's adopted, obviously that's kind of what moves forward, and we can't control that part, but we can do our best to try to clarify that in the plan and the code and see where we get. So any
Osborne, and I can give you specifics after this if you'd like.
yeah.
I thought it was a different project. My other curiosity is under Chapter 11, under code revisions. Is that the process of integrating the code amendments, which is a separate group or committee, integrating into the general plan?
No, what it's referring to is, it's yes and no. So that section, the types of actions, basically, when we talk about recommended actions to implement the plan, they could come in a lot of forms. Some things are going to be a new program that requires funding from the city or another organization. That's one example. It may take changes to the code to implement something. So that's what that's talking about. So what we'll do in the general plan is identify those potential changes that need to happen in the code. Kristen and Don are working on amending the code at the same time. So some of those things may happen concurrently. Some of those things may take longer depending on what they are, but that's basically what that means, is just acknowledging that in some cases you're going to need to do changes to the code to implement the plan. And so that's really just describing that, and then subsequent recommendations in the action plan will kind of call out what whether it's amend the residential district to do X, Y, and Z. Those are the types of things that we would envision. So,
and as Darcy had highlighted at the meeting this morning, it is very convenient that both projects are going on in tandem, so that some of these revisions that, for other communities, there are recommendations that don't happen
for years.
Yeah, until the code is rewritten, and so now those can be more immediate changes that you'll see in the code currently. Yeah.
So I think where we are now is any other questions or suggestions on the action plan, things you think absolutely ought to be included as we move this draft forward for consideration in the action plan. So it could be on any topic. I think just any ideas that you have would be welcome at this point as we're thinking about that over the coming weeks.
Since it's addressed in here, I'm assuming that you're going to get more specifics into it, such as where are we going to allow student housing, what areas, because sometimes you specifically label that, which is a need in the community. And then we're also going to have to talk about the other types of uses, such as the shelters and that. Again, you've mentioned it, but in the action plan, are we going to get more specific on what areas of the community? Because sometimes it's so vague that you can interpret it two ways, and I could actually argue each side that no, the interpretation means this, therefore it should be allowed here. And I've seen staff does it. So if the layperson can argue it, then I think it needs to be a little bit more clear so you don't end up having it just anywhere when someone comes in.
And yeah, we talked a little bit about that last time, but it comes into play in the general plan at a higher level, because we talk about where residential uses of different types are going to occur. We'll have a table in the land use chapter, which we're working on now, which kind of aligns it with specific zone districts that are available to implement that category. And then the work that Kristen and Don are doing is really getting into some of the nitty-gritty of uses within those districts, where things are allowed and that type of thing. So it comes together. Will we get into, encourage such and such housing in such and such location? No. But I think unless that's sort of been already kind of clarified, say, through a more specific plan process already that we're kind of reinforcing, we're not going to make new recommendations about where to include, transitional housing or those types of things. That's really a regulatory issue.
Commercial nodal, you're going to pay special attention to that, correct? And commercial, is that going to get cleaned up a little bit? Are you guys looking?
Are you talking about in the land general plan?
The general
okay.
plan,
So, yeah. Please
the
elaborate
land use
on
definitions. Commercial needs to be cleaned up somewhat. Commercial nodal definitely needs to be cleaned up.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what you're envisioning there?
Commercial nodal seems to, recently, or in the last few years, get used whenever they want to bring a commercial element right in the smack in the middle of a neighborhood. Plus, it seems like instead of it being a nodal, which to me a nodal is your four corners, a circular area, and it specifically states not to allow it to be a strip, which all of the commercial areas, when it's been used here in the past, it seems like it's been in a strip type setting. So I think if we're going to use that, then it needs to be used correctly and not, and that's where staff, I guess, needs to come in. It needs to be, I don't know, the definition we have obviously isn't working because it's being used in areas where it shouldn't. Plus, we have no zoning classifications of what, if it is the land use designations commercial nodal, what zoning can you have in there? So that needs to be fixed. And commercial, I will get back to you and I'll write up the stuff because off the top of my head, I just know that it's not, we had some issues with commercial and how it was being applied between the general plan and the development code.
That would be helpful.
And maybe would it be better to bring that up? Yeah, I don't know. I'm on both committees, so sometimes some of this stuff gets so intermingled. But I'll look back over the current things because I have them written down. Do you want me to email them to Stuart and he
that
can
would be
forward
great,
them to you?
and we'll both take a look at it.
Okay.
We're working on both the land use element and the districts at the same time, so that's great timing if there are suggestions like that.
Okay,
we're
now
happy
the
to hear those.
districts, are we keeping those?
That's a whole nother conversation.
Okay.
That's your other meeting.
Any last comments or suggestions on action plan items or anything else? Great. Well, this has been really helpful discussion, and we appreciate your time. And we'll be back in December. We'll talk about our remaining sections, and we'll kind of keep things moving that way. So thanks very much for coming. And again, we do have this material online. Any help you can give us in terms of getting the word out and getting more participation. It's on the city's website. There's a general plan and development code update page. There's a little link on the left-hand side on the front page that'll take you right to it. So, all right. Well, thank you all, and we'll see you soon.
Are we looking at mid-December, end of December?
The date is, December 24th. No, no, it's the first week of December, so I can't remember offhand whether it's the 3rd or the 4th, but that's kind of where we are right now. But we'll get you confirmation here in the next couple weeks. So, all right. Thank you all.